Okay, I'm going to try and keep this as short as I can and not too confusing. Try to keep it in layman's terms. So basically, I'm looking at a diagram of the ground in the engine compartment. This is the actual kind of diagram of the engine compartment. I'm looking at GE1 and GE2. That's these two grounds right here, side by side, and they both bolt to the top of the block. Those are these two right here, GE1 and GE2. Okay, now I'll pause it. I'm going to go back a screen and show you something. Okay, GE2, top, center, rear of engine. It goes to your ignition coils, which fires your spark plugs. There's 4 of them. All 4 of them are tied in with these coils. So, if I go to number 2, which is the right one, and then pull the wiring harness off of one of the ignition coils and go to the signal wire, I should get a sound on my meter. Now, what I mean by sound on my meter is for a continuity test. I have the battery disconnected, so the battery doesn't play a factor in this. All I'm trying to do, in order for electricity to flow through the wires, you need a good ground to close the circuit. The ability for current to flow through those wires will give you a sound. It lets you know there's no break in the wire inside. You can touch this end and the other end of it, and it'll give you a tone, a beep, to let you know, yes, current is flowing, is able to flow through there. So what I'll do to show you how it works, this is the negative battery ground. It runs back to right here. So I'll put this one on here, like that. And I will take the other one, apologies, I'm trying to do this with one hand. I will take the other one and touch it to the negative cable, and you hear that tone, and it zeroes out. I don't have the best connection back there because I'm not holding it personally, but you get the idea. That tells me that that cable right there has no breaks inside of it. Now, GE2, as I said on that diagram, controls the fuel injector, or not the fuel injectors, the ignition coils to provide spark. So, I've taken the harness for the ignition coil down below off. I will go to the signal wire, put it in here. One moment. There's that touching. Actually, let me get the other one touching first. It'll be easier. Okay, so I've got that one touching. Now when I touch this, if you hear the tone, then you know electricity is able to flow through this wire. I'm touching, and I'm touching, and you hear the tone, and you see the 0. Come on, there we go. Okay, that means that this wire runs through this harness to that. That means that there is no break in that wire that comes through there to there. Now, I'll pause it again, and I'm going to show you what G1 controls. Okay, I'm back. So this is the computer under the dash that it says has communication problems. Now, it also says it's not communicating to the ABS, which that's a separate issue, but it may be from this root cause. So if I come down here and look at pin 31 on the computer, it goes to B21, which is a connector on one end, and E2 on the other end. Now I'll come back to these numbers, B22 or B21 and E2, and I'll show you what that means. But it comes up and it shows this shield. And it shows this shield. Instead of drawing the line all the way through that shield, it just shows you this stops here. There's still a wire that goes through and connects to here. G1, top, center of rear engine. So that's that one that I'm looking for. Now if you look, it's tied in with the crankshaft position sensor. And if you come back and look, intake cam position sensor, right intake and left intake, both cam position sensors. These two sensors and this sensor communicate to each other to tell the car to start. If one of these goes bad, you get a no start. A lot of times when people tell me they've got a no start, one of the first things I check is this sensor right here. So with all of those being tied in, and then there was somewhere else that I saw it tied in. Let me see up here. Apologies, I should pause it, but I'll just show you. Oh, here we go, perfect. Next diagram up. G1, GE1, same ground. There's multiple wires inside there. That goes to the NOx sensor, and it shields and it runs up to, it's going to go back down to the computer again. So I've got NOx sensor, I've got intake, left intake, right intake, cam position sensors, and NOx sensor, all running off of that GE1, which is the left-hand ground. So I'm going to pause this and I'll go up and I'll show you how none of those have signal. Okay, flashback on. So again, battery is still disconnected. Okay, no juice to the battery at all. So I'm going to go from this left-hand one, which is GE1. This is the crankshaft position sensor. This is the NOx sensor. They're both really close to each other. They both ground to that ground. So when I go to this one, touch that pin, I'm metal on metal in there. You can see that it's touching metal. Nothing. Come to the other side. Touch metal. Focus. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And not only that, the code reader's staying OL outside limits. So there's no signal getting to the crankshaft position sensor through this ground wire. This ground wire is going to come down in this harness, and it's got like 4 or 5 wires tied in there. It's not just one ground. The ground will go to each different sensor. So that is dead. This is the NOx sensor on that same circuit. Apologies again, I'm trying to do it with one hand. Oh, come on, Jeremy. Of course. Okay. There we go. Nothing. Nothing. I'm also going to come up to the cam position sensors. There's 3 wires on this. One of these is going to be the signal wire, but I'm just going to show you how I can go down all 3 of them and get nothing. Let me put this up like this. Come on. There we go. Okay. Number 1. Ground fell off. There we go. Okay. Number 1, nothing. Number 2, nothing. Number 3, nothing. Now I'll go to the other side, to the other crank or camshaft position sensor. Same thing, all 3 pins. 1, 2, and 3. Nothing. None of those are getting signal. Now, if I were to peel back this wire, you'd see that there's multiple grounds on this because multiple things are ground off of it. So somewhere in this harness, there's a wire that's shorted or kinked. And the reason it happened now is because when I undid the wiring harness to get this out, I lifted this up, something inside here moved and wiggled. I'm sure if I sat here and wiggled long enough, I'd get signal if I could find where that break is. But then I also come back to here, and I'm going to show you this pin just for reference point right now, and you'll see why. I didn't notice this last night until Stacy pointed it out to me. She was watching a video I took. This pin right over here is the main ground coming from the... This bracket's going to piss me off. This is the main pin coming from the computer that ground goes to. It's very loose. I don't know how well you can see that. Let me zoom in a little bit. I didn't notice it until I was doing some testing last night and Stacy pointed it out. Here we go. See how loose that is compared to these other ones? They don't seem to bend as much. There's some flex there, but when I was watching the video last night, this furthest one flexes pretty easily. I don't think it has the best connection. I've blown it out with air and everything, and there's just nothing, so it's not coming back. So I will show you the importance of these pins. If you look, I'm looking at this straight on. I'm the third row up, the furthest left pin. 3 rows of pins, furthest over. That's going to be important here in a minute, and I will show you why. Okay, the reason that connector is important is it's 54 pins. It's your main harness for the engine to the computer. So now, if you look, that B21 I mentioned earlier, that's this harness, and I'll show you on a diagram here in a minute. But remember I said furthest left, third row up, number 34, that pin right there. I'll go back to the other diagram and show you. I believe on the other one it's going to be easier to see. Yeah, it's going to be easier to see on the other one. Basically, it's a ground wire that controls a lot of things here. Apologies, I don't mean to keep pausing. I've got to go back and find the color one so that I can show you where that number 34 goes. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. So now it's a different diagram. I'm showing grounds now. This is the ECM, that's that main computer again. If you look right here, that number 34, B21 to E2, that's that harness connector that I was looking at, the diagram with 54 pins, that's B21, and it connects into E2, which goes back to the computer. Number 34, that's that wire right there. Black and yellow ground. Comes and ties in with this GE1. So if you follow that pin 34, it goes all the way back to the main computer at pin number 1. It's black and white there, black and white there. At the connection it goes from black and white to a black and yellow. So on this end, on the black and yellow, okay, there's actually 5 grounds underneath there. If I were to peel back the tape, you'd see 5 of them. But pin 34 is the one that's wiggly, and it's a ground. Now I'm going to pause it again because I'm going to show you how that pin 34 has no signal reference. Okay, stay with me. That number 34, like I said, B21 and E2, I'll show you those diagrams. I showed you the B21. E2 is going to be where it plugs in. I'll just show this so that you can verify it and see it yourself. But looking at all these 5 grounds here, you also run out. They run to the oxygen sensors, crank position, knock sensor, throttle control. You're also going to have, at some point, this is going to tie in with those cam position sensors too. So, let me show 34, 37, so it'd be 34, 35, 36, 37, and then 40. So 38 and 39 are not in there. So those are all going to run in a row on that connector. And I'll show you how that correlates here in a minute as well. Okay, back to this diagram again. B21 is that connector. We're going for 34, 36, 37, 38. I don't think there's a 39 or a 40. Basically, the ones that are all grounds are going to be on this row right here. They were between 39 and 40, I don't believe, and there was one missing in there. But I'll just go down the line and show you how you'll hear a sound like on this one, and this one, telling you those grounds are good, that controls other things. But that 34 that controls those sensors I'm looking for is dead in the water. Watch this. So I've got the ground in there really well, tucked in between there. I'm going to spin this around. I've moved that harness out of the way. So, third row up, third one over. I should hear that tone. Remember that sound. I'll show you how it goes on other ones. I'll go like... Oh, my meter turned off, sorry. There we go. Okay, so I'll touch like 34, 35, 36, 37. I'm pretty sure 36 was one of them. Let's see. Where did we go? There we go. Okay, so we've got sound, 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 sound. That one was not a ground. That one was not. That one was. Now this is 34. This is the one that controls the crank position and camshaft position, oxygen sensors, all of that. Dead. I'm barely touching that, and look at how much that pin moves. I mean, they all move a little bit, but that one just seems to be, I don't know. But it's dead as a doornail. There's just nothing there. And I'm getting... See? Every time I touch 34, it's dead. Now, the explanation that you need to understand or know is that this harness here is not plugged into the computer right now. The computer is back inside the car. And it comes through the wall right here and comes to this, which plugs into here. So there will be a corresponding wire on that, on this end of the connector that plugs into that 34. I'm going to check this side of the harness. If the electrical signal is good on this side, it means the computer is trying to get the signal, but it's breaking at this point, which means the wire that comes out of here for 34 and runs through this harness has got a break in it somewhere. And when I lifted the harness out, it probably tweaked it to where that break, I can't find that sweet spot. They didn't have to take the harness off before, and they didn't have to unplug this to do the alternator, so they never messed with it, so it never did it, so of course it ran. But once I unplugged it with that tab that seems a little shaky, and with there being a break somewhere in here, it's just unfortunate that it fucking happened that way, and I really feel horrible. I couldn't not remove the wiring harness. I have to take it out to get the engine out, so it's just an unfortunate event. So no battery voltage is supplied here. I'm just testing just the harness that just controls these things in here. So as you can see, some things are getting the signal, like the ignition coils for spark plugs and stuff. That's fine. But the ones that I need it to start, that sensor for the crank position, these sensors for the cam positions, the O2s, those are all things that you need in order for a car with what they call variable valve timing, which this has, to start. There's a few other sensors here that I'm going to test. Oil and coolant temp lights and stuff like that, because she said she'd had a coolant, never had a coolant temp or an oil light. So I'm going to test those too, because those might end up, as I track that wiring harness, it might come back and be on that same exact ground. So I know it's kind of long, I know it's kind of winded, but I want to show you that I'm in here and I'm digging and I'm trying to find the problem. And I definitely found something here that is, I mean, it's cut and dried. You're looking at it, there's definitely no signals there, so that makes some sense. What I'm hoping is that on this side of the plug back to the computer, that I test that pin 34, whichever one it is, this one or this, it would be that one, I believe. I'll test the wire back there, back to the computer with no electricity, and as long as I get that tone, it tells me that current can flow through here from the computer up to here. It's just not flowing from here and transferring to here to ground this stuff. That way we'd be good, because I could just find that wire and replace that wire, or get a new wiring harness for this. Done. And it solves that. It gets rid of that. The ECU wouldn't actually be ruined. It was just given the ECU codes because that ground signal was getting cut right here, and it's saying, hey, I'm not able to communicate, there's a ground missing. That's hopefully the best case scenario, because that's an easy fix. That's also probably going to stop all the dash lights she's been having, the grounding issue, the alternator issue, the stability control, the cruise control. All of that is contained in here in the ABS motor, but this wiring harness comes back into the computer and talks to the main computer. So when that main computer isn't able to send out certain signals, it's not going to also communicate to that. So hopefully by fixing this ground, this will be able to communicate back to that computer as well, and all those lights will go away. All the grounding issues, all the electrical issues will all be fixed. Best case scenario.